The Indianapolis Colts are in a bit of a lull in their head coaching search, so let's take a step back and answer some fan questions. Today, I dive into the hottest topics that you all asked for on this edition of Locked On Colts. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. I'm Zach Hicks. I'm here by myself today, guys, because Jake had to bail on me. But seriously, I saw Jake's episode yesterday and I was like, I got to jump on this. I got to do this own solo podcast. So Jake is taking a little break. It's all me today. I got to see if I can just match Jake's energy from yesterday's show and kind of bring my own flavor to the solo podcast. So we'll see if this works here today, guys. My flakiness and my jitteriness, we'll see if that ends up working here on the solo podcast. But guys, I know that I'm here by myself. I know it's not Jake on here with me, but I technically do have a little bit of a co-host today. You guys sent me a ton of questions, a lot of really good questions on Twitter for our edition of fan questions on today's episode. So it's like I have all of my Twitter friends here as my co-host, which is great. I love having you guys on with me. We'll do even more of these where I just sit here and I talk about what you guys have sent in. Before we actually jump into parts of the show, though, former Indianapolis Colts head coach Frank Reich has been hired as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. Just great for Frank. I hope he has a lot of success there. I really do stand by the fact that I think he was a great coach, a really good coach, at least in Indianapolis. Just a lot of circumstances just went awry, and the Colts needed to do some kind of change. Maybe not in the middle of the season, but I do think the Colts ultimately needed to move on, and I really hope Frank finds a lot of success down there. Great guy, good coach. I hope he does some good things there down there in Carolina. But first, guys, we're going to jump into this first segment. And this first segment's all about the new head coaching search for the Colts. You know, Carolina has already filled theirs. Dan Quinn, as I was recording this the first time, I tried to record this one time. Halfway through, Dan Quinn decides to pull his name out of all the running and go back to Dallas. So I had to start over the recording because I didn't want it to be the guy I was talking about in that exact moment. So unfortunately, this is my second time recording. But yeah, Dan Quinn pulled his name out. So among the finalists left for the Colts so far, they still have guys they're going to talk to next week. But so far, the only names still remaining on the Colts head coaching search is Jeff Saturday, Raheem Morris, and Ejiro Evero. Those are the guys left that have either received second interviews or going through second interviews. And you guys had some questions about this coaching carousel here for the Colts. So first question here is by our guy, Matt Maringer. Number 5 is what his Twitter thing is, at MMMaringer5. Gosh, I try to pronounce this 10 times already today, but at MMaringer5. That's how you say his Twitter handle. He said, build your ideal staff for your top head coaching candidate. Doesn't have to be a full staff, but head coach, OC, DC, maybe O-line coach. So I'll build my ideal staff for my top candidate among the finalists here. So again, Dan Quinn is out. Obviously, I'm not going to consider Jeff Saturday as my ideal guy there. So among the two guys there, Ejiro Evero versus Raheem Morris, I'm definitely going to go with Raheem Morris as my ideal candidate. That's the guy who I've liked throughout this whole process. I really like the energy he could bring. I like the experience on both sides of the ball. And I think he's grown a lot over the years. 2-time Super Bowl winner as well. Like, what is there to dislike? So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Raheem Morris. I think he'd be great in Indy. And I'm going to build like an ideal staff around him, just using his connections and using guys that he's familiar with. The first name at offensive coordinator that pops up is Greg Olsen. Not the commentator, not the guy in the booth. We're not going to hire another person from a major network to work for the Colts. But yeah, no, Greg Olsen is a coach that has been around the league for a long time. I think it's like 25 years now. He's been around the NFL, has worked under the John Gruden tree, worked alongside a lot of other really experienced offensive play callers alongside Sean McVay this past season. So you know that he's got some of that top stuff. But Yeah, I think Greg Olsen would be a good veteran presence to have. He was offensive coordinator in with the Raiders in Las Vegas a couple years ago. Did a really good job there with Derek Carr. So, yeah, I think Greg Olsen would be a good offensive coordinator to hire under him. And then on the defensive side, obviously the dream pairing would be Ejiro Evero as the defensive coordinator under Raheem Morris. Like that would just be perfect. If the Broncos go with D'Amico Ryans, for instance, Ryans might bring on a new defensive coordinator. That would leave Evero out there without a job, and he could be a great defensive coordinator under Raheem Morris if the stars would have to align. It would be tough to go into a head coaching interview and say, hey, you didn't get it, but hey, come work under Raheem Morris. That's kind of a tough sell right there. But perfect dream world, Ejiro Evero. More likely one that I actually like is Eric Henderson, the defensive line coach from the Rams. Very, very talented defensive line coach. Did a lot with Aaron Donald the last couple of years to, obviously further that Hall of Famer's career. But he's also done some great jobs and had some really good experience there. I'm working under Wade Phillips, I believe, a couple of years ago. He's worked under Gus Bradley. I believe he worked under Brandon Staley there for a little bit with the Chargers or with the Rams. So yeah, he's just a guy who has a lot of good experience. And I know that he would bring more of an aggressive attacking type of style to the Colts. So yeah, Eric Henderson would be the defensive coordinator. And then again, if we're talking dream staff, I think Raheem Morris, if he could potentially poach Aaron Kromer from the Buffalo Bills, that would be awesome. But if he's not able to do that, I think Keith Carter would be a good addition as the offensive line coach. Keith Carter was recently the Tennessee Titans offensive line coach. He did just get fired, but some of the reports were not great. Some of the reports were that he's a little too hard on his players in practice, kind of pushed them, and it led to some injuries. I would be concerned about that for sure, but also I think this Colts offensive line needs a little bit of a kick in the butt. I'm not saying that this is a soft group up front, but we saw their play kind of stagnate in recent years and then not playing to that aggression and that physicality that you want. So maybe they just need a guy who's going to come in and kick them around a little bit. Maybe not literally, but something like that. So yeah, Keith Carter, I think, would be an ideal one there. So yeah, that's the kind of staff I think Raheem Morris could build and one that I'd be very, very happy with there. So yeah, Raheem Morris, my top guy of the finalists that are left. And we'll see if he ends up getting the job. The next question we had here for head coaching search, our boy Felipe down in Brazil, I believe. He's just awesome. He asked, you guys have been talking about the fit between head coach and quarterback. And Ballard is quoted as saying that fit team is important when decisions draft. So if they hire a head coach and draft the quarterback that fits better, or they hire the head coach based on the quarterback they already like, which way do they go with this? So basically what he's asking is this new head coach going to have input on the quarterback selection? And I think that's a great question because Chris Ballard probably already has a couple guys that he has circled. So when he's doing these interviews, he's probably asking like, oh, who do you like? And if they say a different quarterback, maybe that influences the Colts to go a different way. But from what we understand and what we know about this Colts structure the last couple of years is Frank Reich and his staff had a lot of input on draft day. Frank Reich helped select Paris Campbell. That was a big Frank Reich selection. Frank Reich also really wanted Kylan Granson. That was a big Frank Reich selection there. So Frank Reich had a lot of input on who the Colts drafted on draft day. So I would be shocked if the next head coach didn't have some input as well. So yeah, I would expect the next head coach to have some kind of input on that process, but also I don't think it's going to be a thing where like when they go into these interviews, they know who they like at quarterback and they want to see what these candidates can do with that quarterback prospect, if it makes sense. It's not like, it's not going to be Chris Ballard pounding the table for Will Levis. They hire a guy and the guy's like, you know what, Bryce Young, or I'm out. Like, it's not going to be some kind of fight like that, but it will be interesting to see how all that breaks down there. But guys, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about the Colts and what they're going to be roster-wise next season. Are they going into a rebuild? They might. So yeah, we're going to talk about that next. But first, as a small business owner or hiring manager, that success in 2023 all depends on your team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experience to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post company and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications all on one platform. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, guys. So besides this head coaching carousel and talking about, everything is quarterback and head coach, that's what you guys just love to hear about right now. Another question that you guys commonly brought up in the thread, you guys can go see it on Twitter, Locked On Colts Twitter. We asked for your fan questions. You can see a lot of these questions we're asking about what's going to be the state of the Colts going forward. Are they going into a rebuild? Are they a team that just needs to retool and go further? Are they a quarterback away? Or insert CJ Stroud on this team and they go from a 4-win team to a 12-win team, 12-win team. Jeez. Yeah, they might be that. I don't know. But I don't think it's interesting. I don't think they're going to go into a rebuild. I think they're going to go into more of a retool-ish, like a retool-ish. So our first question here was by @bcarp1234, making life easy for me, trying to pronounce all this stuff. Do you see Chris Ballard treating this season as a total rebuild where he gets rid of several veterans via trade, or more of a retooling? And yes, I think it's going to be a little bit closer to a retool than a rebuild. But one thing that Chris Ballard did say in his end of the season press conference is the expectations might have been a little too high, which is horrible to say. You hate seeing them say like, oh, our expectations were playoffs, and that might have been too high for our team. Like you want to be competitive. You want those expectations to be high, and you want it to be something that the fan base can get around. It's hard to convince a fan base on a rebuild or a retool or something like that. But I do think it's going to be a little closer to a retool than a rebuild. I don't think we'll see several veterans like Quentin Nelson or Braden Smith. Like they won't get traded. Those are two guys that I doubt would get moved this offseason. Their contracts are hard. And also, like, those are good players still. Like, yes, they had down seasons, but they're good players that you don't want to move. But I do think we could see some veterans moved, if that makes sense. Kenny Moore II, a guy with zero dead cap going forward, who may not want to be here after the season. It would make sense to potentially move or release him. Ryan Kelly is another one where still a decent player, but he's not going to be worth that $13 million that they're going to be paying him next season. So do you see this as a potential, cut, trade, something like that? And I don't think that those indicate a rebuild if you're moving those two contracts, but it's definitely not the status quo that we've seen. We haven't seen the Colts do many salary dumps or trade because of salary or trade to get that contract off the books. We haven't seen that under Chris Ballard. We will definitely see something like that this year, though. And I think Kenny Moore and Ryan Kelly are very, very realistic examples. Maybe Mo Alley Cox getting released as well. So I don't think those indicate a rebuild, but definitely a retooling. I don't see them trading a bunch of big veterans and going full Chicago Bears and breaking it all down to build it back up later. I think it's going to be cutting some loose ends off and then using the resources from those loose ends to kind of build it back up a little bit. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be a big time rebuild by any means. And that leads us to our next question in this segment is going to be from @MakingItRain18. So I guess there's 17 other Making It Rains out there. Crazy. Do you think the team trades DeForest Buckner for draft capital? If so, what would he be worth on the market? I'd be shocked if Chris Ballard would sign off on any kind of deal like that. The only way I could see the Colts trading DeForest Buckner away is if DeForest Buckner goes into Chris Ballard's office and says, trade me now. I cannot see him. I mean, Chris Ballard in his end of the season press conference basically talked about some of his shortcomings as a GM and some areas where he missed. And he was asked about that trade for DeForest Buckner in the 2021 NFL draft. And he had the 2020 NFL draft. He said he had no regrets. He wished he could fill an entire team with DeForest Buckner. He loves DeForest Buckner. DeForest Buckner is everything that he wants on this Indianapolis Colts team. So I highly, highly doubt that he would trade him away unless DeForest Buckner said, hey, you guys might be going into a couple down years here. I don't want to be a part of that this late in my career. Trade me to a team that is ready to win. I could see Chris Ballard honoring that. But outside of that, like he's not going to be used in the trade package to move up to number one. I just don't see it happening. I know a lot of Chicago Bears fans are throwing that out there, DeForest Buckner plus Michael Pittman Jr. plus 3 first rounders to go up 2 spots. Like that's not going to happen. But I could see a potential trade if Buckner wanted out, but I think it would be a type of trade where Chris Ballard would honor the player and give him to a contender or a team where he could win if he wanted out. That's the biggest thing here. Chris Ballard would never willingly trade DeForest Buckner. He adores DeForest Buckner. But in terms of a potential market, it's tough because we do have one example in recent history of a 30-year-old or a near 30-year-old defensive tackle who's playing at a high level being traded for a first-round pick, and that's Richard Seymour back in, I think, 2006, 2007, around then. But outside of that, we rarely see this type of player move for a premium pick. It would probably be more of a second or third rounder because we are still talking about an all-pro caliber guy. But it is tough. Again, near 30-year-old player, $20 million contract. That's tough. That's tough to move. So yeah, I would picture it being a day 2 pick, and I think you guys can all agree with me that would not be worth it for DeForest Buckner. DeForest Buckner is well worth more than that to this team, to this roster, to this organization. Again, just to kind of build off this theme that you guys are doing with this section, I think the Indianapolis Colts are going towards a retooling and maybe a potential down year or 2, but it's not going to be a full-on rebuild. It's not going to be Chicago Bears rip it all apart. It's going to be just a slight sorry, that was my Coke can right there. It's going to be a slight rebuild to kind of build, or slight retooling just to kind of build it up in the next couple of years. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be ripping it all down because Chris Ballard just doesn't have that time. He can't really survive that long. Don't get me wrong. I think there was a good reasoning to fire him this past offseason, like before this offseason began. But now that ship has sailed, it's not like he's on perfect footing. He's not a guy who can afford 3 or 4 more years of a rebuild. It's going to be a slight retool with the hope of getting to the playoffs within the next season or 2, or he's out. So yeah, I don't think the Colts are going to trade off guys like DeForest Buckner or Quentin Nelson or Braden Smith or Shaquille Leonard or even maybe a Michael Pittman Jr. Like that one, I can go a little back and forth on, but I just don't see it happening. But yeah, coming up next, guys, we're going to talk about a very divisive quarterback prospect that you guys sent a lot of questions about. Maybe it's because I'm really high on him. That's why you guys went that way. But before we talk about him, first, with the Colts season dead and gone, you can still bet on football guilt-free. To do that, we suggest FanDuel. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, then that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers can join today and get started with $150 in free bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets and money lines, point spreads, and player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. This is all in the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use, so football fans don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, guys, to close this one out, you guys asked a lot of questions about Anthony Richardson, the quarterback out of Florida. He is definitely the most divisive quarterback in this class. I know Will Levis out of Kentucky is also a little bit divisive. A lot of people don't know what to do with him, but I guarantee that this one is more divisive. Anthony Richardson, a quarterback who had, I believe, 52% completion percentage on his passes in college. That's something you normally don't see from a first-round prospect, let alone a top 5, top 10 prospect. So I understand the concerns there, but man, guys, if this guy hits his potential, we're talking about a top 5 quarterback in the entire league. I am sky high on him. I understand the concerns. Don't get me wrong. So let's dive into some of your guys' questions about this. At Brodo Baggins, great name, just an awesome name. At Brodo Baggins asks, what do you think a realistic timeline for Richardson to develop into a quarterback that can make a deep playoff run, given the right team and staff to do so, obviously? So obviously, if you're throwing him out there with a dud at quarterback, Jeff Saturday as their head coach, let's say Jeff Saturday is the head coach, I don't see Anthony Richardson ever developing into that type of quarterback because I just don't have faith in him as a coach or the type of staff that he could build around Anthony Richardson. But if you give him a Shane Steichen or maybe Raheem Morris with that Shanahan type tree underneath, I realistically see him getting to a really high level of play within the next 2 years, 2 or 3 years. Like Anthony Richardson, it's really not mental with him. Like unlike a lot of big project quarterbacks, it's not mental with Anthony Richardson. It's very, very much just mechanical. Everything is mechanical. The feet aren't there yet. Even the upper body, like just the throwing motion, needs a little bit of work. And honestly, very, very disconnected from the upper body to lower body when he's throwing these balls. So you're seeing him. You'll have a slot shot just wide open. A vertical slot shot wide open that was just dialed up perfectly. That he reads it perfectly, or he looked off the safety in a great way. And you'll have it wide open, but his body just can't get that throw on target because he's so mechanically bad right now. And it's not because he's a bad quarterback. He's just a young quarterback who hasn't had a quarterback coach, who had an offensive line coach as his play caller in college. Like, this is a guy who just needed more help around him in terms of coaching and just mechanical work on his whole body. So I think when you get him into that NFL program, with a quality NFL program, working with a Tom House, with an Adam Dado, and then working with a very good coordinator, play caller like a Shane Steichen or a Brian Callahan or Raheem Morris with a staff he could build, then I think we're looking at a guy who could really turn around in a couple of years. If we look at Josh Allen, for example, the outlier of all outliers, I know, guys, don't kill me in the comments for that. But if we look at Josh Allen, it really took him, 2.5, 3 years to become a starting caliber quarterback that could make a playoff run. I see a very realistic timeline for Anthony Richardson to do kind of similar things to Josh Allen if the coaching is right around him. So, yeah, I really think Anthony Richardson can get to that level a lot sooner than what some people say. I don't think he's a guy that you have to bench for 4 years like some people are saying, or like, oh, this guy's going to sit on the bench for 2 years. No, he's not. Like, if you're taking him in the first round, the most you're going to sit him on the bench is 1 season. I would probably put him out there late in the first season if you're not a good team, which might be the Colts. Who knows? But yeah, I would definitely do Anthony Richardson within a couple years. I think he can really get there if he has the proper things around him. And then another question here: on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 absolutely not, 10 guaranteed, what are the chances the Colts pull the trigger on Anthony Richardson? And that's from our colleague over at horseshoehuddle.com, DeWalster Drake Wally. He's been on the show a couple times, or I think we've been on his show a couple times, actually. We'll have to get him on here as well. But yeah, what are the chances that the Colts pull the trigger on Anthony Richardson? I'd probably go 4 or 5. 4 or 5. I do know from a couple people I've talked to that Chris Ballard is very, very much intrigued by Anthony Richardson. I think he really likes Anthony Richardson, but is he willing to bet the 1 or 2 years that he might have left in Indy on a quarterback who might not start in those 1 or 2 years? That's the ultimate question right there. Will he bet the rest of his tenure on this quarterback turning it around and finding a stopgap that can prolong his job security until then? That's going to be the ultimate question there. I do think he's going to really like Anthony Richardson. I have heard that he does like him, but does he like him enough for that? Does he like him? Does he like Anthony Richardson enough and trust that upside enough that he can survive a couple years while he's not playing or while he's struggling? I think that's going to be a very fascinating conversation, because guys like CJ Stroud and even Will Levis to a degree probably give you a higher floor immediately, which Chris Ballard kind of needs. He kind of needs that right now. So that's going to be a really, really fascinating conversation as we get closer to draft day. But I do think he's going to like Anthony Richardson. I like Anthony Richardson, obviously. And then another one right here is Anthony Richardson, the kind of prospect that we could reasonably expect Chris Ballard to consider at Chris Blystone from Stampede Blue. Used to work with him a couple years ago. Great dude. Yeah, I think he will. I think he will consider him. The thing is, the one thing I'll go on a little tangent about before we close out this episode is we don't know Chris Ballard's type at quarterback. Like, he's given us a little bit of insight over the years in press conferences, and he's gone into it a little bit, but we've never seen him with this opportunity. We've never seen him having to take a quarterback this high in the draft with so much pressure on him and so much of a premium, spot for him. So we don't know exactly what to expect. There are reports that he was in on Pat Mahomes, reports that he liked Justin Herbert and Jordan Love and Justin Fields, but we don't have anything concrete to just judge him off with quarterbacks. So I think this year will go a long way in determining what type of quarterback and really what Chris Ballard views in quarterbacks. Does he view, a super athletic, high upside player like Anthony Richardson over a high floor, smart player like CJ Stroud? Or does he like a little bit of best of both worlds there with Will Levis in between? Or does he go for the major outlier in Bryce Young because Bryce Young is that good of a quarterback? I think it's going to be a very fascinating conversation, as I said a couple times in this segment here, but we'll see. I do expect Chris Ballard to like Anthony Richardson. Is it enough to take him top 5? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. But that's it for us, everyone. That's all I got for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this solo segment. I know I went a little bit longer than what we typically do with solo ones here, and I hope that you guys didn't get sick of my voice and my fidgeting around and hitting cans around and stuff like that. I'm definitely not as dialed in as Jake. My ADHD makes me bounce around a little bit while doing these solo episodes. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave some feedback in the comments. And if you want me to do more solo stuff, I will shoot up on adrenaline, throw back a bunch of Cokes, and just have some fun with it for sure. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this solo format here. And if you're just begging for Jake to come back to rein me in, but make sure you guys are following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also subscribe to Locked On Colts podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you guys next week. Probably next week. Yeah, next week. We'll be back next week.